The galaxy is full of stories, tales whispered in cantinas, trading posts, and war councils. Some are exaggerated myths, others lessons to frighten children into obedience. But then there are stories that no one dares call fiction. Stories too raw, too haunting, too true. This is one of them. It began not with a war, but with an observation. The Galactic Federation had charted humanity as a young, reckless species, barely worth the effort of conquest. Their fleets were small, their weapons primitive compared to civilizations that had traveled the stars for millennia. By all logic, humanity should have been irrelevant, a brief flare of intelligence destined to be swallowed by the vast, merciless cosmos, and yet the Federation feared them. Not because of their technology, not because of their numbers, but because of something buried deep within humanity's nature, their relationship with death. For most species across the galaxy, death was the ultimate fear. Civilizations were built around avoiding it, delaying it, or finding ways to exist beyond it. Soldiers trained with the understanding that survival was victory, that retreat was rational, that to die was to fail. Humans broke that logic. The First Contact Wars revealed it in brutal clarity. When alien fleets descended upon human colonies, most expected immediate surrender. After all, logic dictated that a weaker species should yield. But instead the humans fought. Not just soldiers, civilians, workers, even children. They fought with weapons, with tools, with bare hands. They fought when the odds were zero, when the outcome was inevitable, when surrender would have saved them from agony. And the aliens discovered something horrifying. Humans did not fear death the way others did. They used it. They embraced it. They weaponized it. There is one story the galaxy still whispers. The siege of Corin IV. The Federation's fleets surrounded the planet, its defenses shattered in the first week. By the second, the humans had no hope of relief, no chance of victory. Any other species would have negotiated terms, pleaded for mercy, or laid down arms. But not the humans. Instead, they dug in. They turned cities into fortresses, sewers into ambush points, skyscrapers into sniper nests. When ammunition ran low, they crafted weapons from scrap, from machinery, from whatever lay at hand. And when those ran out, they fought with nothing but fists and rage. The Federation broadcast messages promising safety in exchange for surrender. The humans responded with silence, then with defiance, then with a transmission that would echo through the galaxy: "We are already dead, and so we will fight as though death cannot touch us." The battles that followed were madness. Federation soldiers reported humans charging gunfire with no cover, setting themselves ablaze to hurl into fuel depots, detonating explosives while still in enemy grasp to take as many with them as possible. Casualty reports mounted until commanders stopped counting, stunned by the sheer scale of loss inflicted by a species that refused to accept the meaning of death. It was not that humans sought death recklessly. It was that death, to them, was not an ending. It was a weapon. That was the terror. The Federation's finest warriors, trained across centuries, found themselves shaking in the face of human resistance. How do you fight an enemy who does not fear the one thing that holds power over all life? How do you defeat an army that welcomes the cost of victory, even if it means their lives? The siege of Corin IV ended in ruins. The planet was reduced to ash, its population annihilated. But the Federation did not claim it as a victory, because though the humans were gone, the legend remained. Soldiers carried it back in their whispers, in their haunted eyes, in the tremble of their hands. They spoke of humans who laughed as they died, who smiled as they dragged enemies into oblivion with them, who refused to yield even when logic demanded they do so. That story spread, and with each retelling, the galaxy's fear grew, because they realized Corin IV was not an exception. It was humanity, and humanity was not done. Even as planets burned, even as fleets fell, humans fought on every front with the same terrifying disregard for death. They turned hopeless stands into nightmares for their enemies. They made entire campaigns costlier than victories were worth. They refused to follow the rules of survival. To the galaxy, it seemed like madness. To humans, it was something else entirely, defiance woven into their very being. And so, the galaxy began to understand why humans terrified them. Not because they lived, but because even in death they could not be defeated. The story of Corin IV should have been enough to warn the galaxy, but it was only the beginning. The Federation, proud and unwilling to admit weakness, launched more campaigns to break humanity once and for all. Their logic was simple. If overwhelming firepower had not forced surrender, then total annihilation would. Crush them quickly, burn their worlds, and scatter their survivors into nothingness. But logic, once again, failed against humanity. The next infamous story came from the Battle of Mirror Station, a trade hub captured early in the conflict. The station was massive, a ring world structure orbiting a dying sun, populated by hundreds of thousands. The Federation assumed it would fall quietly, its inhabitants either enslaved or executed. But what they did not anticipate was the human garrison hidden within. There were only a few hundred soldiers left, Marines cut off from their fleet, stranded in hostile territory. According to every strategic calculation, they were irrelevant, incapable of resistance. And yet, when the Federation fleet moved to secure the station, the humans struck. What followed became a case study in terror. The Marines did not fight defensively. They waged war as though their survival did not matter. They turned corridors into kill zones, sealed bulkheads to suffocate their own positions if it meant trapping enemy forces inside, and triggered chain explosions across civilian sectors to deny the invaders comfort. They fought not for victory, but to make the Federation pay a price so steep it would echo across the stars. One transmission from a Federation officer survived, intercepted before his signal was cut. They are not soldiers. They are executioners of themselves. They kill without hope, without hesitation. I saw one laugh as the fire consumed him. This is not war. It is a nightmare. The humans held Mirror Station for 36 days. 36 days without resupply, without hope of relief. They fought until the last man and woman fell, their bodies reduced to ash, their defiance etched into memory. When the Federation finally secured the ruins, they expected silence. Instead, they found walls smeared with human words written in blood and soot. "You will never break us. Death is not your weapon, it is ours." The words shook the Federation. Soldiers began refusing orders to face humans. Desertions rose, and most dangerous of all, whispers spread that perhaps humanity's madness was not madness at all, but power. Another tale rose shortly after, known as the Harrow Deep Offensive. It took place on a mining colony buried beneath the crust of a barren moon, its tunnels stretching for hundreds of kilometers. When Federation troops advanced, they expected the humans to retreat deeper and hide. Instead, the humans collapsed entire sections of tunnels, while they themselves were still inside, burying both friend and foe in tons of rock and steel. The Federation lost entire divisions underground, swallowed in the darkness. And when search teams tried to recover survivors, they heard the echoes of human voices still singing war songs from beneath the rubble. That was the moment the galaxy began to shift its perspective. Death was supposed to be the great equalizer, the one truth all life feared. Yet humans had turned it into fuel. They welcomed it not as an ending, but as proof of their refusal to bow. Across the Federation, leaders tried to explain it away. Primal instinct, some claimed. Madness, said others. But soldiers knew better. They'd seen it with their own eyes. It was not madness. It was choice. Humans chose to stand in the face of death, and in that choice, they found strength no other species could fathom. One species, the Sirac, offered their analysis. Known for their cold logic, they studied human behavior during battle and presented their findings to the Federation Council. Humans have inverted the universal law. While all other species fear death and seek to delay it, humans exploit it as a weapon. They accept loss as inevitable and, in doing so, remove fear itself. This renders them uniquely dangerous. To kill a human may achieve nothing. To threaten them with death achieves less, for they do not see death as defeat. They see it as contribution to victory. The report was dismissed officially, but privately commanders whispered of its truth. How else could they explain the countless battles where humans should have fled, should have surrendered, and yet chose to fight until the stars themselves seemed to burn with their fury? The galaxy began to dread not human fleets, but human resolve. They began to fear not human weapons, but human will. Because once a human decided that death was not to be feared, the battle was already lost. One final story sealed this truth in the minds of the galaxy: the defense of Aegis 7. It was a frontier colony, barely fortified, when the Federation's dreadnoughts appeared overhead. With no hope of reinforcement, the human defenders made a choice. They would not wait for the enemy to strike. Instead, they launched a suicidal assault against the fleet, hurling every shuttle, every mining vessel, every piece of orbital machinery into the enemy line. Most were destroyed instantly, but a handful broke through, detonating within the hangars of the dreadnoughts, crippling them from the inside. Witnesses spoke of human pilots screaming defiantly into open comms as they plunged their burning crafts into enemy warships. Not cries of despair, not pleas for mercy, but promises: we will not stop. Even in death we will reach you. The Federation won the battle. The colony was wiped out, but the cost was staggering. Half the fleet rendered useless, morale shattered. The legend of human defiance carved deeper into the galaxy's memory. That was when the galaxy truly understood the terror of humanity. It was not their strength, not their numbers, not their weapons. It was the simple, impossible truth that they did not fear death. And in not fearing it, they became something more powerful than anyone could have imagined. Fear spreads faster than fire in the void of space. By the time the Federation reported its victories against humanity, the galaxy did not hear triumph. It heard whispers of terror. Word of Corin life from Merrill Station, Harrow Deep, and Aegis 7 had already spread through smugglers, mercenaries, and deserters. The official records might have painted humanity as crushed, but the stories painted them as something else entirely. Deathless warriors who refused to bow, who fought as though already gone. Alien soldiers who had faced humans firsthand carried those stories with them. Many never spoke of the battles openly, but their silence spoke louder than any report. They drank more, slept less, and flinched at shadows. In the mess halls of Federation warships, soldiers whispered of humans who smiled in the face of annihilation, who sang as flames consumed them, who dragged enemies into oblivion with their dying breaths. The whispers became myths, and myths became warnings. "Do not corner a human," one saying went, "for the corner is where they become most dangerous." Others spread across entire civilizations: "A wounded human is not defeated. It is only armed with desperation." Never outnumber a human. They will see it as opportunity. Death is not the end for humans. It is the beginning of their vengeance. What horrified the galaxy most was not that these sayings existed. It was that they felt true. Too many battles ended with humans fighting beyond reason, beyond survival, beyond logic. And in those moments their enemies realized something chilling. Humans were teaching the galaxy that fear of death was a weakness. The Federation Council held emergency sessions to address this spreading panic. In those chambers, representatives of dozens of species argued furiously. Some demanded harsher measures, extermination of human populations before their defiance could inspire rebellion. Others warned that such brutality would only fuel the legend. And a few, the most cautious, suggested retreat, isolation, even negotiation. But none could deny the central problem: fear itself. Not human fear, alien fear. Federation soldiers hesitated when sent against humans. Some deserted before campaigns even began. Others obeyed orders but fought poorly, their minds haunted by visions of charging humans who did not care if they lived or died. The war, which should have been swift, dragged on. Every battle cost more than the last, not only in blood, but in morale. One particularly damning report came from the Krell, a reptilian species bred for war. Known for their ruthlessness, they were considered the perfect shock troops of the Federation. Yet after a campaign against humans, a Krell commander delivered a statement that stunned the Council. "We were not beaten. We were unmade." The humans fought like spirits unbound. To kill one was to invite 10 more to rise. Their deaths did not weaken them. It strengthened their resolve. And now my soldiers no longer dream of victory. They dream of escape from ever facing them again. The Krell never fully recovered their reputation after that. And the Federation learned an uncomfortable truth. The war was no longer only fought with weapons. It was fought with legends, with terror, with the creeping realization that no amount of firepower could break a species that embraced the very thing all others feared. Meanwhile, beyond the warfront, neutral civilizations watched closely. The galaxy is vast, and countless species live beyond the Federation's grasp. Many of them despised the Federation's dominance but feared its power. Humanity's defiance changed that. For the first time, they saw a species that bled the Federation, that proved even the mightiest empire could be wounded. In the markets of independent stations, merchants traded not just goods but stories of human defiance. Smugglers began smuggling weapons to human colonies, not for profit but out of admiration or perhaps hope. And on distant worlds, oppressed peoples whispered that maybe they too could rise, if only they found the courage humans had shown. The Federation realized too late that by trying to crush humanity, they had unleashed something far more dangerous: inspiration. The psychological war grew worse. In some sectors, Federation soldiers began abandoning positions without contact, convinced humans lurked nearby. Others fired on shadows, panicked at the thought of ambushes. Whole divisions required constant surveillance to prevent collapse. The Council labeled it human syndrome, a spreading paranoia caused by overexposure to human tactics. But to the humans, it was not paranoia. It was reality. They had learned that fear itself was a weapon, and they wielded it as ruthlessly as any rifle. One chilling example came from the defense of a colony, known as Jericho's Reach. The humans there were outnumbered 100 to 1. But instead of fighting conventionally, they staged elaborate ruses, broadcasting recordings of battle cries, setting fires to make their numbers seem larger, leaving corpses propped as sentries to give the illusion of endless resistance. The Federation soldiers, convinced they were facing an army rather than a few desperate survivors, retreated after weeks of combat. When the truth came out, humiliation spread through the ranks like a disease. Even when humans lost, they found ways to make it feel like victory. That was the true terror. By this point, the galaxy no longer saw humans as fragile. They saw them as monsters wearing fragile shells, beings who refused to play by the rules of mortality. And the more the Federation fought them, the more monstrous they seemed. In cantinas, mercenaries told tales of human warriors who kept fighting even with limbs torn away, who charged even as fire consumed them, who laughed in the face of certain death. Some stories were exaggerations, some were not, but all of them painted the same picture: a species that would rather burn than bow. And perhaps the most frightening truth of all was this: the humans did not do this because of hate, or vengeance, or glory. They did it simply because they refused to stop. The war reached a turning point not because humanity gained superior weapons or ships, but because the galaxy itself began to change. Fear, once the Federation's greatest tool of domination, had turned against them. And humanity, the species that refused to bend to fear, was now wielding it with terrifying precision. By this stage, human fleets were still outgunned, still scattered, still bleeding. But their reputation had grown into something far larger than their numbers. Every skirmish, every doomed stand, every story of defiance added to the myth. And myths have power. The galaxy began to see humans differently. Once dismissed as fragile and reckless, they were now spoken of as inevitabilities. If a Federation fleet saw humans on the battlefield, hesitation followed. And hesitation, in war, was as deadly as any weapon. One battle sealed this shift: the stand at Eridan's Rift. It was a narrow corridor of space, a natural choke point lined with shattered asteroids and gravitational storms. The Federation sought to push through and crush one of humanity's last major colonies. A single human fleet stood in their way, barely 24 ships against more than 100 Federation warships. By logic, the outcome was inevitable, and yet the humans did not retreat. They held the rift, ship by ship, hour by hour. Federation commanders expected them to break, to flee, to collapse under the storm of fire. Instead, the humans charged into suicidal maneuvers, ramming enemy vessels, detonating reactors at point-blank range, tearing apart cruisers with kamikaze runs. Every time the Federation thought the humans had been broken, another desperate attack carved losses into their fleet. When the battle ended, the human fleet was gone, obliterated. But so too was more than half of the Federation's force, and the colony the humans protected still stood. It was not victory in the traditional sense. It was something greater. It was proof. Proof that humans could not simply be crushed. Proof that even against impossible odds, their defiance made survival possible. Proof that the Federation could bleed, could stumble, could fail. Across the galaxy, eyes opened. Species long subjugated by the Federation began to whisper that perhaps humanity was not insane, but free. That perhaps the humans had uncovered the secret the galaxy had forgotten. That fear of death enslaved civilizations, but those who refused that fear could never truly be conquered. This terrified the Federation Council. Not just because humanity had resisted, but because their resistance had become contagious. Rebellions began to flare in distant systems. Small uprisings, minor at first, but all carried the same message: if humans can fight, so can we. And so, the Federation sought to erase the legend. They launched campaigns not only to destroy human worlds, but to silence the stories. They burned entire archives, silenced deserters, hunted down mercenaries who had fought alongside humans. But it was too late. The truth was already in the blood of the galaxy. For the humans themselves, survival became more than resistance. It became a philosophy. They knew they could not match the Federation's strength in numbers or technology, but they did not need to. They had something far greater, the certainty that they could terrify their enemies simply by existing. One human commander, when asked why his soldiers refused to retreat even when hopelessly outmatched, gave a response that was recorded and spread far beyond the battlefield. Because retreat is for those who fear death. We do not fear it. We welcome it if it buys us one more breath of freedom. That single line echoed across systems. It was translated into a dozen languages, painted onto ships, scrolled onto walls of colonies. For humans, it was defiance. For others, it was revelation. For the Federation, it was doom. The shift grew clearer with each battle. Federation fleets hesitated to engage. Their commanders demanded overwhelming numbers before committing, wasting time and resources. Meanwhile, human raids grew bolder. They struck supply lines, liberated prisoners, spread propaganda. Even when defeated, their actions left scars, wounds deeper than losses of ships or soldiers. They left fear, and fear made the Federation weak. Some species began openly defying orders to fight humanity. Others began questioning whether the Federation's authority was worth the cost. And still others, secretly at first, began reaching out to humans, offering aid, intelligence, resources. Humanity, once dismissed as reckless fools, were becoming symbols of rebellion. But the humans themselves did not see it as grand strategy. For them it was simple. Survival demanded defiance. And if death came, it would come on their terms. One soldier, captured after the fall of a colony, was interrogated by a Federation officer. The alien demanded to know why he and his people had fought so hard when surrender would have saved them. The soldier's reply was simple, and it spread like wildfire. Because death is not the worst thing. Chains are. That answer stunned even his captors. And when the recording leaked, it burned into the galaxy's mind. Humans were not reckless. They were not suicidal. They were something else entirely, free of fear's chains. The Federation began to see the true scale of their mistake. They had sought to crush humanity quickly, cleanly, but in trying to annihilate them, they had instead forged them into something unbreakable, a legend, a myth, a terror that spread further than any weapon could reach. The galaxy had seen wars before. It had seen empires rise and fall, species extinguished, civilizations erased. But never had it seen a species that refused to acknowledge the ultimate law of life, that death was the end. Humans had rewritten that law, and now every species in the galaxy wondered, if death could not stop them, what could? Desperation is a dangerous fuel, and the Federation began burning through it at an alarming pace. The war that was supposed to be quick had become a bleeding wound that refused to close. Humanity, with its fractured fleets and scarred colonies, should have been finished long ago. Instead, they were still fighting, and worse, they were inspiring. The Federation's leaders could not admit it, but they felt the same fear spreading through their soldiers. They had seen the reports, the endless lists of irrelevant human colonies that somehow dragged entire fleets into ruin before being reduced to ash. They had heard the intercepted transmissions of human soldiers shouting battle cries as they charged into certain death. And though they dismissed it publicly as propaganda, in their private moments, they shivered. In response, they escalated. Entire planets were designated for sterilization campaigns. Fleets were ordered not just to occupy, but to eradicate every trace of humanity. The logic was simple. If death could not break the humans, then annihilation on a scale so absolute it left nothing behind would. But here again, logic betrayed them, because when humans realized their survival was no longer even an option, they did not collapse into despair. They became something worse. They fought harder. The siege of Calum Prime illustrated this terrifying truth. The Federation unleashed orbital bombardments, reducing cities to glass and forests to ash. Any other species would have crumbled under such fire. But the humans of Calum Prime refused to wait for death. They launched counterstrikes from the ruins, built weapons from rubble, and turned craters into traps. Civilians fought alongside soldiers, not as conscripts, but as volunteers. Federation commanders, confident that their overwhelming superiority would force submission, instead reported catastrophic losses. Ambushes claimed troop transports, sabotage crippled supply chains, and kamikaze strikes devastated warships. Every death the humans suffered only seemed to fuel more attacks. By the end, the planet was gone, burned beyond recognition. But in dying, Calum Prime had cost the Federation a fleet. The Council's frustration boiled over. They called humanity irrational, insane, broken. Yet they could not deny the results. Their empire, the largest in the galaxy, was being humiliated by a species that had no business surviving. Even neutral species began to watch more closely. At first, they dismissed the humans as suicidal fanatics, doomed to burn themselves out. But as years dragged on, the pattern became undeniable. Humans did not win by avoiding death, they won by redefining it. Whispers grew louder in the outer territories. What if death was not to be feared? What if chains, as the human prisoner had said, were worse? What if survival meant nothing without defiance? The Federation knew this philosophy was poison. It was spreading through their own ranks. Some soldiers began refusing orders to fire on civilians, fearing retaliation that would come even after their own deaths. Others admitted openly that they would rather face any other enemy than a human. And in the dark corners of the galaxy, mercenaries began defecting to the human cause, drawn not by pay but by belief. Humanity, once seen as fragile, was becoming a symbol. And symbols were far harder to kill than bodies. The Federation doubled down on propaganda. They called humans monsters, reckless beasts, a danger to the order of the galaxy. But the more they demonized them, the more powerful the legend grew. After all, monsters were feared, and humans were living up to the title. The Battle of the Shattered Ring only deepened this reputation. It was fought on a massive orbital megastructure, once a jewel of Federation engineering. Humans, cornered and outnumbered, detonated portions of the station mid-battle, tearing it into fragments that spun like blades across the void. Both sides suffered horrific losses, but the humans had made their point. Even in their last moments, they would turn the galaxy itself into a weapon. Survivors spoke of humans charging through firestorms of debris, screaming defiantly even as the vacuum tore their bodies apart. The psychological toll was immense. Neutral worlds began to whisper a new phrase whenever Federation envoys tried to intimidate them. "Do you think we fear death more than humans?" It was a dagger to the Federation's pride, a reminder that fear had shifted. Once their power had rested on the inevitability of compliance. Now, that inevitability was gone. For the humans themselves, this transformation was not a strategy crafted in some council chamber. It was instinct. It was history repeating itself on a cosmic scale. On Earth, they had endured wars, disasters, plagues, and extinction-level threats. They had survived by refusing to surrender to fear. The galaxy was only learning what humans had always known, that life meant nothing without the will to fight for it. even in the shadow of death. A Federation officer captured in one of the later campaigns confessed something chilling to his interrogators. When I look into their eyes, I do not see desperation. I see freedom, and that terrifies me more than their weapons. Because freedom from fear of death meant humanity could not be controlled, and a species that could not be controlled was the greatest danger to an empire built on submission. The Council knew it. The galaxy knew it, and humanity knew it too. It all came to a head in what would later be remembered as the last gambit of Sol. The Federation, desperate to end the war, launched its greatest offensive against Earth itself. Their plan was simple: cut off the human homeworld, destroy its defenders, and end the legend by erasing the source. Billions of ships drawn from every corner of their empire converged on the Sol system. Their leaders promised this would be swift, decisive, final, but humanity knew better. They had studied the Federation's arrogance, their reliance on numbers, and their obsession with control. This was not the end of the story. It was the final page humans themselves would write. The defense of Earth was unlike anything seen before. It was not just soldiers who fought, but civilians, scientists, engineers, even children. They knew the odds. They knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. And still, not a single one faltered. They fought because surrender was meaningless in a universe that demanded obedience. They fought because death itself no longer frightened them. Federation fleets swarmed the outer defenses. Human ships, patched together with whatever resources they had, hurled themselves forward in suicidal charges. Asteroid fields were turned into minefields, orbital platforms into sacrificial cannons. Every loss slowed the enemy just long enough for the next line to prepare. And then, when it seemed Earth itself would fall, humanity unleashed its final weapon, not a super laser, not a hidden fleet, but the one thing no empire could ever replicate: willpower. Entire crews volunteered for kamikaze strikes. Pilots rammed their ships into enemy flagships, detonating reactors in blinding novas. Ground forces detonated their own positions to halt invasions. Civilians chained themselves to generators, forcing the Federation to slaughter them just to progress an inch. It was brutal, it was merciless, and it was utterly unstoppable. By the battle's end, Earth was scarred, its orbit littered with wreckage. The Federation fleet, once so vast it blotted out the stars, was reduced to scattered remnants. They had won nothing. Humanity had not only survived, but in their survival, they had proven something undeniable. Death did not frighten them. The shockwaves of Sol's defense echoed far beyond the system. Species once cowed by the Federation began to rise. Some declared independence outright. Others joined humanity. Not because of treaties or bribes, but because they had seen the truth. Fear could be broken, and once it was broken, no empire could stand. In council chambers across the galaxy, officials whispered in dread. They realized the unthinkable. Humanity's defiance was contagious. The more they tried to suppress it, the more it spread. Death had always been the Federation's most reliable weapon, but now that weapon was useless. Legends of the war became stories told in hushed tones across the stars, not of human victories but of human defiance. The mother on Calum Prime, who carried her child into battle rather than hide. The pilot who sang as he rammed his fighter into a cruiser's bridge. The soldier who, dying of his wounds, still laughed in the face of the enemy officer. These were not myths, they were truths, witnessed by thousands, recorded in black boxes, etched into memory, and the galaxy trembled. Because the one truth no empire, no council, no fleet could deny was this: humans do not fear death, they fight beyond it, they weaponize it, and in doing so, they reveal the weakness in every system of power built on fear. The Federation never fully recovered. Its fleets grew smaller, its colonies more restless, its influence thinner with every passing year. Humanity, bloodied and scarred, did not become conquerors. They did not raise an empire. They did not seek dominion. Instead, they simply stood unbroken, and that was worse, because an empire could be negotiated with, bribed, or destroyed. But an idea that lived in the marrow of an entire species, could not be killed. Generations later, alien historians would still debate the question, why did humans survive when logic demanded their extinction? Some argued it was their adaptability, others their reckless courage, others their uncanny luck. But those who looked deepest into the stories of the war knew the answer was far simpler. It was because humans had embraced the one truth that terrified the galaxy most. They had looked into the void, into the certainty of death, and smiled, and once you smile at death, nothing else has power over you. The galaxy would never forget, and it would never stop fearing the species that had taught it the most dangerous lesson of all. Humans do not fear death, and that is why they will always survive.